It's Integrative Studies Class 2201, and this is a Northern Ireland Special Report. Good afternoon, I'm Josh Overholser. Religious conflict in Northern Ireland. When did it start? Why did it start? How is the conflict shaping the country today? And is there an end in sight? We'll get to all of these questions throughout the course of our program, but first, a brief look at the country itself. Located on the northeast portion of the island of Ireland, Northern Ireland is a part of the United Kingdom. The country has experienced a slight population growth in the last 30 years, with the most recent census placing the population around 1.8 million. This makes up just under 3% of the total population of the United Kingdom and around 30% of the population of the island of Ireland. Its largest city is its capital city of Belfast, with a population of just under 300,000. For some perspective, this will be roughly the same size as Toledo, Ohio. Economically, Northern Ireland constitutes the smallest of the four economies that make up the UK. Industry has been the driving factor, with fields such as shipbuilding and textiles, but in recent years, this has been replaced by services coming mostly from the public sector. In terms of ethnicity, over 99% of the population is white, with the largest minority being Asian, making up just 0.4% of the population. Less than 0.1% of the population identified themselves as black. Looking at religion, the country is fairly evenly split between Protestants and Catholics, with Protestants making up 45.6% of the population and Roman Catholics 40.3%. Of the Protestants, 21% identify themselves as Presbyterian, while 15% belong to the Church of Ireland and another 4% are Methodist. Just under 14% said they had no religion, while 0.3% identified with other non-Christian religions. With more on this religion and this Protestant-Catholic divide, we turn to Anna Schiffbauer and David Grimes. Both are Otterbein students studying theology and social justice. And guys, while the conflicts ultimately began dating back to King Henry VIII's divorce, a lot of people would argue that things really started to kind of heat up with the dispute over land and wealth, correct?
Well, Josh, it's not exactly that cut and dry. We could say that it started out predominantly religious and then progressively got more political, starting with King Henry VIII looking for his divorce, found that it was really hard to do that under the Catholic Church and Catholic rule. So he ultimately declared himself supreme ruler of the English Church, which was Protestant. And then under that Reformation of the Protestants, all the countries controlled by Great Britain then became Protestant, though Ireland remained predominantly Catholic. And then under his daughter, Queen Elizabeth, and her rule also being the supreme ruler of the English Church, being Protestant, promoted Protestant settlement into the Catholic island of Ireland, then creating a huge change in the religious makeup of that island, leaving the northern part predominantly Protestant and the southern part predominantly Catholic. The Protestants ended up being more wealthy, reaping the benefits of the Catholic land, though they took it, the Catholics being left with the not so great agricultural land.
And over the centuries, the labels of Catholic and Protestant became closely associated with wider power struggles within their society, and it morphed into somewhat of a marker of power because of the Protestant majority of the British colonies being, they were the richer people, and the poor minority of the Catholics were obviously less wealthy.
And then this ultimately led to the creation of two separate sides. You have the Unionists and then the Nationalists. So explain a little bit about that.
Right. This basically mainly came about in the 1920s, more specifically 1921, when the British Parliament actually designated Northern Ireland as a British state and the rest of the island of Ireland as a separate sovereign country, Ireland. Ultimately, the Protestants and the Catholics still were left in Northern Ireland, and then we see conflicts between what arose was Unionists wanting to stay with the control of Britain and leave Northern Ireland the same, whereas the Nationalists wanted to break off from the rule of English government and become part of the country of Ireland.
Religious affiliation is important to politics and you know, where you see yourself on the political spectrum in Northern Ireland. But it should be noted that these differing religious beliefs, Catholic and Protestant, they're not really the root cause of these differences. It's all about what has become associated with the respective religious label over the generations.
And then, you know, while this conflict has been going on for quite some time, things really seemed to escalate in the 60s with a time known as the Troubles, and that's when you had the Irish Republican Army and then the British forces also getting involved. And then with that, human rights started to come into play too, right?
Absolutely. The Troubles are the name for the violence that occurred from the 1960s to the 1980s. And the nationalist IRA, like you said, the Irish Republican Army, they were the paramilitary group that fought to reunite Northern Ireland with Ireland. And the unionist counterpart to that was the Ulster Volunteer Force, and they were fighting to keep Northern Ireland a part of the UK. Actually, in the late 1960s, the IRA broke into two groups. The Provisional IRA became a more militant group, more violent, because they were prepared to do anything necessary to get to the reunification. And then all this goes to the human rights as well, because Sheila Murnaghan was a legislator in the Northern Ireland Assembly, and she brought forth a human rights bill 4 times during her tenure there, and it failed each time. It would actually be 30 years. 1998 is when the Parliament finally passed a human rights bill.
Right, and we can even go further back and say that there were huge human rights problems in the beginning of the 20th century when the Protestant-controlled government in Britain passed the Special Powers, and that gave the police forces extra ways to detain citizens without due cause, also overriding some of the local Northern Ireland civil rights laws. This changing the pendulum of balance of power more to Great Britain.
And actually this happened again in 1974 when the Parliament passed the Prevention of Terrorism Act. And so this gave the British police, again, powers to detain IRA suspects or terrorist suspects for up to 7 days without arrest.
All right, thanks guys. And this has even been depicted in Hollywood films such as In the Name of the Father. In this clip, we see Jerry Conlon being brutally interrogated by British forces. Conlon is being falsely accused with the IRA bombing of a Guildford pub, but he's being held under the Prevention of Terrorism Act. Even though Conlon is innocent, the British authorities need a confession, and they will do anything they can to get it, even going so far as to threaten the life of Conlon's father. Take a look.
I'm gonna shoot your dad. What did you say to me? Little Bridie, you'll have no daddy. I'm gonna shoot you, Sandy. He's ready to shoot my dog! He's ready to kill my dog! Come on, let it all out. Let it all out, all that hatred. You hate this, don't you? Hmm? You hate this enough to bomb and maim. Hatred. So why don't you just let it off your chest, huh? When it starts to mess up with your mind, hmm?
Give me the fucking statement, for fuck's sake. Right, that's my name there. You can write what you like.
Again, that clip comes from the 1993 film In the Name of the Father. Certainly some human rights issues going on there. Well, while we tend to focus our attention on the violence itself, religion and the conflicts also made other impacts on the people of Northern Ireland. With more on these impacts, we turn to Marina Pyrus and Kayla McGuire. Both are Otterbein students of theology and social justice. And Kayla, the fighting also affected artwork, right?
Absolutely, Josh. We see during the 30 or so years of violent conflict, there's murals going up all over the place, all over Northern Ireland. These murals were painted by supporters of the Irish Republican Army as well as the Ulster Volunteer Force, and they would have been painted on the street-facing sides of houses and businesses as sort of a statement of loyalty for either side. We also see things like memorial murals being painted and dedicated to people who lost their lives during the conflict, and nonviolent murals painted just to represent pride in Irish culture.
All right, thanks, Kayla. Well, the hope of any form of conflict is that you can learn from your past to improve your future. With more on how Northern Ireland is doing now, here is Al Jazeera's Alan Fisher.
They're building for a future few thought they'd have, in a place bedeviled by death and destruction for 30 years. This is what peace looks like. More than 3,000 people died on the streets of Northern Ireland as the IRA waged a guerrilla war to force Britain out of the northeast corner of the island of Ireland. Other armed groups fought to stop them. 10 years ago, an historic agreement was reached which brought peace, and now this place has been transformed with new shops, buildings, and importantly, jobs. I lived in Belfast around 15 years ago, and it was a very different city then. You could be walking down this main shopping area and suddenly find yourself alongside an army patrol with their rifles drawn. To get into shops, you had to go through security checks that were unbelievably stringent. But now this is just like any other city in the United Kingdom, no longer surrounded by a ring of steel. Gruesome landmarks from 30 years of what they called the Troubles are now part of the tourist trail.
It was up here where the most murders, the most atrocities happened.
Veteran journalist David McKittrick has been reporting on Belfast for more than 30 years.
Yes, this is still a very deeply divided society. Catholics and Protestants don't always get on very well together. But at the same time, the deaths have almost gone, certainly from the times when there were over 100 people being killed a year. Now the economy is coming back a little. Now people are looking forward to a bit of peace. Now there's more confidence.
The government has put up millions of dollars to attract new businesses from all over the world. Even so, with the province's history, it's been a hard sell.
It's still quite difficult. A lot of the time, what we try and do is if a company's saying their company, a US company or a company from the Far East is visiting Europe, we ask them to make a stop over to Belfast or to Northern Ireland as part of that visit. That's probably the easiest way to do it.
Among the big investors, this company from America. Its Belfast office runs computer support functions for one of the US's biggest insurers. It leapt in to invest when peace was fragile. Now it has 1,500 on the payroll.
They were taking quite a risk, being one of the first major investors after the Good Friday Agreement. But I think they were prepared to take that risk, and I think their risk has been rewarded many times as a result of that. And I think, I mean, things could have gone one way or the other at that stage. Thankfully, everybody has chosen peace, and I think we're seeing the dividends of that now.
The truth is, the economy would never have prospered without peace, and peace prospers with a strong economy. 10 years on, most people here remember what Northern Ireland was like in the dark days. No one wants to go back. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera, Belfast.
And so according to Fisher, the future does look bright for Northern Ireland. The cities are peaceful, the economy is rebounding. Are you guys seeing the same sort of things?
I would say so, Josh. It seems like the people of Northern Ireland, even though there is still tension, they're looking to new heroes. We see some of these violent themed murals being painted over or turned into advertisements, or being replaced by murals of nonviolent heroes such as soccer players, or being dedicated to people in countries facing violent conflict right now, such as Palestine.
I would agree. I think that things are definitely looking up. And I mean, on paper, technically the violence is over. According to the Good Friday Agreement, which was signed in 1998, it has helped, but the divide definitely still exists between Catholics and Protestants. In Belfast, for example, the housing is still, the Catholics and Protestants still live in segregated communities, and periodically tensions erupt, and even though there's no paramilitary violence anymore, violence still occurs within the sects, and it's still a big characteristic of that area, of the interface areas. education also. Only 5% of Northern Irish children attend integrated schools, so that's still a huge part of education. A child can go through their entire primary and secondary education without ever meeting a person of the other community. And also cross-community marriages are still kind of taboo. So it's definitely more peaceful, but I wouldn't call it a post-conflict state.
Right, still a long ways to go, but you know, as you mentioned, on paper the violence is over and they do seem to be living in peace more now than they were. And then with this, that's led some people to make the argument that religion was never really the issue in the first place. It was more or less kind of used to cover up other intentions. What would you guys say to people making those claims?
I would definitely agree with those claims. I think that the identity of a nation is so closely related to its religion, and certain religious truths tend to mold beliefs in society, and it turns into somewhat of a paradox because this institution that preaches, you know, acceptance and forgiveness kind of starts acting with a certain exclusivity. And I mean, ultimately, when you give yourself an identity, you have to fight for those ideals if they're threatened. And I think it becomes more personal than just the title. And I think it has over the years, definitely.
Well, you know, of course, as we've seen throughout the course of this program, it's certainly a very complex issue. And with this complexity, what do you see as possible solutions going forward? I mean, I know it's hard to say because it's so complex, but are there answers to this?
Well, Josh, I would definitely say that a solution would have to come with the acceptance that, you know, networks and relationships are kind of what religion is about. And I think these two groups need to understand that and work together for a problem that they've both been facing for a very long time, and realize that it's just not so black and white.
I agree with you 100%, Marina. This is a really muddy issue. And if the people of Northern Ireland are going to reach a resolution, they're going to have to acknowledge what happened in the past and maybe risk reopening some of those old wounds. And the real question is, are the people of Northern Ireland up for the challenge? Some would say yes, some would say no.
All right, thanks guys. Well, that is all the time we have for this special report on Northern Ireland. For Anna Schiffbauer, David Grimes, Kayla McGuire, and Marina Pyrus, I'm Josh Overholser saying thanks for watching, and now we send it back to the classroom for questions and comments.